Hello, everybody. Welcome to Brockton Writers Series. Tonight, we have a wonderful lineup for us, so I'm very excited for us all to be here. We're going to begin with a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge that the Brockton organizers do our work on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat nations, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We acknowledge the ways that colonization, genocide, and racism have impacted Indigenous peoples, and that settlers have a responsibility, including us, me personally, have a responsibility in making space at events like these for Indigenous voices. And all other settlers have a responsibility to make space, to listen to Indigenous voices, and to support Indigenous liberation and Indigenous rights. We all share the responsibility to critically understand and challenge systemic oppression, including recognizing how our ancestors as settlers and ourselves as settlers have contributed to colonial legacies, both with our silences and with our actions. And there's a number of ways that you can support decolonization efforts, Indigenous rights efforts. And if you're ever wondering, I'm happy to point you towards them, but there's a wealth of resources on the internet. And I would encourage you all to read more Indigenous authors, since you're probably all readers if you're here with us today. We'd also like to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to feature and center Black and Indigenous voices, as well as other people of color and other underrepresented groups, including people with disabilities, which is included in our mandate. And thank you very much to Ephemera Series for hosting us on their online platform during the pandemic. So for today's lineup, we have a guest speaker with a brief Q&A, and there are 4 readers, followed by a group Q&A for them as well. Each presentation will be a little shorter than when we were in person, and we will skip the break. Please type your questions into the YouTube chat box as they occur to you. We'll collect them to ask our authors during the Q&A, and it's better if you type them in as they occur to you because there is a bit of a time lag. Emily?
Brockton Writers Series was founded in November 2009, which means we've been bringing literary goodness to Toronto and the internet now for over a decade. Our Brockton Writers Series volunteers are Hannah M. DeMichael, Nancy K. Clark, Dorianne Emerton, Sonia Patare, and I'm Emily Sanford. And we have the pleasure of working together to keep the Brockton Writers Series going. If you'd like to join us, you can check in with one of us after the readings, and we'd love to hear from you. We would like to acknowledge with deep thanks the continued support of the Ontario Arts Council, who make this series possible. During these pandemic times, we're also very deeply indebted to our host, the Ephemera Series. You can check out their events right here on this YouTube channel. And finally, our sincere thanks to you, our audience, for being here with us tonight. Now on to Brockton's guest speaker. Tonight's guest speaker is Tricia Fish, a Canadian writer who studied art. She's best known for her debut comedy feature inspired by her youth in Cape Breton, New Waterford Girl. True story, I actually fell out of my seat and rolled in the aisles laughing. It was before LOL, ROL, whatever was even a thing, but I actually literally did that. So it was, New Waterford Girl was inspired by her youth in Cape Breton, and it was nominated for 7 Genies. She writes features, shorts, and television, and her new series is Anna Films. Tricia Fish, take it away.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to real writers, prose writers. So the topic that I was going to talk about tonight is prose versus screenwriting. And I thought about who will be here, like the people who will be here. Prose writers probably thinking about how you might, start writing screenplays, how that the skills in writing prose and your way of writing can be brought to screenplays, how you can possibly control your own work by learning about screenplay. So whether or not you want to write screenplay adaptations of your work, you'll at least know how it works and what the system is and what the format is and maybe even what the business is. I was doing a little research today, and I tried to compare. I looked at comparing the film business in Canada with the publishing business, because I'm starting here because I think a lot of writers do amazing work, prose writers, and they make hardly any money or not enough to live on. So I think it's always that like carrot you have in the back of your head that, okay, if I write a screenplay and then I sell it, like, will that save me? So that is a motivation, I think, to be able to use your talents to make a little chunk of money, but also doing it with your own material. I started writing screenplays because I came from an art background. I was making experimental films and I was developing them in, Super 8 and buckets and, acting in my own stuff. And it was all completely experimental, poetic, kind of vaguely sort of stand-up comedy meets dour imagery. And so I came to film from an art background, and then I worked on film shoots. And I learned so much working on film shoots, as for everything from a PA to eventually a director. I directed a feature in the end, and I'd read the script, and I'm sure you writers would feel the same way. If you read a script, you think, I could do so much better than this. I know what I want to see on the screen. I know what I want these actors to be doing. I know what, how I want to turn this world upside down. So it is kind of motivating to work on a film set. But anyway, stats about the business. So book publishing, as far as I can see, is a $2 billion industry in Canada. And then the film business is a little over $9 billion industry. I never think about those things. And it's the first time I've ever looked that up, but I kind of wanted to see what the size comparison was, and how many, doing like really basic math on what the opportunities are. So in 2019, there were 119 feature films made. Now there's a lot more television made. So that's a good opportunity for writers. And in 2018, there were 14,000 books published. So you can see the difference in the opportunity there. It is very, very hard to get a screenplay made. But you're paid quite well. But the main difference between prose and screenplay is that when you're writing a screenplay, you don't explain or write out the thoughts or feelings or the psychology of the character. You see it in action, you see it in images, you see it in sound, you hear it in sound, and you experience it in time. So it's the texture and like the way the voice is less important as a texture, and the storytelling chops in terms of events and dialogue is much more important. So in a way, if your work is adapted, what the screenwriter will look for is who's the person, what's their key problem or their key goal. It all gets deduced down to this. And what do they do to try to fix it or overcome it? And what's the outcome? All of the other material in your narrative will be stripped away to those key elements. So if you're thinking about writing a screenplay, those are the kind of that's the key equation that you do need to focus on or to make sure is intact. Which brings us to the whole system of structuring a screenplay. It's very, very mathematical and structured. You know how you learn how to write a haiku when you're like in grade 3. It's a whole particular structure, right? A screenplay has a very particular structure too. It's 90 pages to 120 pages. It's a 3-act structure. Certain things happen on certain pages. You have to hook the reader in by the first 10 pages, otherwise your screenplay will be tossed. But that said, prose writers are so prolific. I did a little math on this too. If you're writing a novel, it's about 50 to 70,000 words-ish, ballpark. I took a half-hour script I just worked on and deduced it down. What was it? 6,900 words. So then I figured a feature film is like 21,000 words. You know, it's like it. So if you're writing, you know, a novel is like, what was it? 70 pages of prose. So you know that point when you start a novel and then you get stuck, then you're done. It's your screenplay. There, you're finished. You know, like it's actually not that much volume, which means that it has to be very, very, very succinct. There are lots of great sources online to look up how to structure, like how to visually structure the page of a screenplay, because that form is very, very important. It's basically a chunk of stage direction, which tells you what you're seeing and what the actors are doing, and where you are in time, and then the dialogue. And the characters in the dialogue and there's a lot of white space. So for a prose writer looking at the format of a script for the first time, it can be very consoling. There's a lot of white space. It's not that much material. But the key thing is focusing on the emotional equation of the person. Like, what is it that I always talk to students about? Their character. The story is about the character, basically. So the character is usually broken in some way. You know, there's usually they're human in some way, and there's something missing in their life. There's something missing in their world. There's some longing that they have. And that is the hardest thing to show at the beginning of a story on screen, to see that in imagery. And it's a real challenge, but total short form, if you wanted to write a screenplay, like a feature screenplay in a week, you could do it. You figure out who the person is, what's broken about them, what do they want, or what is their problem, and make a list of like 10 things they do to try to fix the problem in random order. Take those things and order them in order of easiest, like the first thing they try to do that kind of doesn't work. But you know, when you're trying to fix a problem, you try the easiest thing first, right? Put them in order of the easiest to the hardest. And the hardest is like your end of Act 2 crisis. And how everything wraps up after that. It's like you could write that in 2 weeks. For a prose writer who has a voice already, who understands dialogue, who innately has a great storytelling sense, you can pick up a screenplay book and look at the structure, 3-act structure, very simple. What little things come on each, you know, on page 25, and what comes on page 45. It can be quite fun to take your story idea and fill in those pieces all the way along and make this thing yours. But that's kind of the key thing. You need to make this screenplay truly yours and not what you think is going to be commercial, what you think is going to appeal to someone. I would advise you as a writer to write something that you would love to see. Don't worry, is anyone going to like it? Is anyone going to hate it? Are they going to be bored? Is it not going to be popular? Whatever it is, just write what you would love to see. And that excitement is contagious when you read it on the page. And that is how you can really start your screenplay writing and do well at it, especially if you have accomplishments as a writer in another field. But that brings me to the qualifications to be a screenplay writer. You don't need any. You can have like, you know, your screenplay as a brick, you know, there's my screenplay. And that is the only qualification you need. If your screenplay is killer, if your screenplay is entertaining and people like it, they will pass it on. It will start to spread. People will want to get behind you and behind it. And if you're a decent, nice, sensible person and you're not a crazy person who seems like you might be too difficult to work with or something, like, as long as you're not crazy and you're nice, then people will, you know, jump on the train. They really will. They'll support you, because it is very, very rare to read a script that comes from the heart, is very personal, is alive with someone's real honest energy, you know, whether it's light, dark, whatever the genre is. I've taught quite a few students now at U of T and continuing ed, and it's always so exciting when someone starts to write and then they start to get carried away and they're really excited by what they're writing. And it's such a magical state. And they're just obsessed with this thing and they're blasting through it. And yes, it can be meandering or they can be screwing up the overall structure or whatever. But if you have the material on the page for your first draft, for example, and it's really alive with your energy, then it can be molded and tweaked and fixed so that you can create a polished, finished screenplay. It's that energy and excitement that is translated. Unfortunately, when you finish a screenplay, that's not like finishing a book and having it sent out into the world and then you can start thinking about your next thing. It's a collaborative art form. So you do need to have a producer to raise the money to shoot the film. You need a director. And basically you hand it off to the producer who takes care of all this stuff and gives you a bit of money for it. And you can only hope and pray that that director is good and the actors are good. And there are so many collaborative elements that occur in shooting of a film. The director can be nuts. One actor could be an alcoholic, or in one of my films, one was a narcoleptic, traveled the world and she couldn't stay awake for shots. Oh. And, you just don't know, if the cinematographer has to be good, the sound person has to be good, everything has to be fantastic. So it is like a magic in a bottle, when a film really comes alive. But the screenplay is the heart of the whole thing, and it's possible for you to do it. I'm probably out of time, I think. Is that right? I think so.
We're getting there. I'm just, thank you very much, Tricia. I'm just compiling some questions. And I just wanted to shout out to the folks who are watching on YouTube to enter your questions. Okay. And then my co-host Ryanne is going to type them into our chat here and I'll ask the folks. But in the meantime, I wanted to ask about the directions that you write. What's the deal with those? That's a lot of non-dialogue kind of stuff. And
yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I won't do a screen share, getting too teachery there. But if you look at a screenplay, it basically, where a prose writer might have 2 pages of prose so that the reader feels, they smell what is going on, they see it, they see all the colors, they can imagine that, it comes alive in their mind. In a screenplay, because you're just the first step, the trick is to paint a picture in as few words as possible. And ideally, if you're thinking about it, you describe the room, the setting, whatever's going on in 2 lines. So it really is a craft, it really is a trick it's almost like poetry. So I do feel poets have an advantage here. It's kind of describing in a poetic way what you're seeing. It's not like, well, there's a table and it's set for 4 and it's a very long table and, the walls are red. No, it's like a wealthy home circa 1930. You know what I mean? It's very, the quicker the read and the more digestible, sadly, the descriptions are, the easier it is to proceed through the film in your mind. And it has to be handed off for the director and the set decorator and the costume people and everything else to make your vision come to life. But if you say, she's wearing a blue dress, but it's not part of the story, it's not necessary for the story that she wears a blue dress, it doesn't come back later, or, they find it in a pond or whatever, then you don't put it in. And as a screenwriter, everything that you put into the script has to have a story reason. So it's really rigorous that way. But, first to 5th draft, you just write whatever you want. And rookies, normally, when you're first starting out, you write long stage directions. I did. Beginning of my first script was half a page of, she walks past the roses. And I saw the whole thing, but you have to cut that out. So cutting's easier than creating. Hope that answers.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that does. That's exciting. I like that poets have the advantage there because they so rarely do. Okay, we do have some questions here. first, who do you send your screenplay to?
Oh, have you written a screenplay yet? Okay. You send your screenplay, if you have a finished, polished screenplay and other people have read it and you've done as many drafts of it as you possibly can, then you try to you send it to agents and producers. So you look at all the production companies in Canada, for example, who make all the, like, look at the films that you like that were made in Canada, or the shows that you like that were made in Canada, and look at who produced them. And you reach out to their development person, if they have one, or the producer who runs the company. And normally every production company will gather maybe 20 screenplays and try to make a few, you know, depending on which one they can get money for. The other thing you can do is try to send it to agents, but there's that catch-22 that I don't know if you have in publishing prose, and that is unless you've had something made, you won't get an agent, or unless you have a deal on the table, you won't get an agent. So what you can do basically is you send your screenplay out and you keep bugging production companies and be persistent and keep writing, and you know, they will get to know you, hopefully. And eventually you might have someone say, you know, I really love this project of yours, I'd like to option it. And that's when they basically give you a few $1,000 typically to temporarily own your project. In Canada, it's for 2 years. Seems like a long time, I know. Say for $5,000 or something. And their job as a producer is to go to all the funding agencies like Telefilm and different, you know, government envelopes and private financing and everything else to raise the money to shoot your film. That usually takes a long time, which is why they have that two-year window. Anyway, to back up a little bit, if a producer says, I'd like to do a deal with you, I'd like to see if I can make this happen, quote unquote, that's when they slide a contract over the table. You don't know what the hell it is. And you call up agents and say, I have a deal on the table. Would you like to negotiate this for me? And it's money in their hand. They don't need to do anything. They're already going to get 10 or 15% of whatever this deal is. They will say yes. So you are at the advantage there and you have your pick. You can talk to different agents and see who you like, really. So hope that answers your question.
It totally does. That's fantastic. Okay, we also have a question from Laura Com saying, any insight into finding your spine?
Oh yes, the story spine. Or your personal spine. Wow.
I don't even know what that means.
Twofold.
I mean, you don't have a spine.
You need a therapist.
Both seem like valid questions.
Every writer needs
I mean, in life?
In life, yes. Okay. Therapy's awesome. No, the other side is the spine is basically the spine of the story in a screenplay is basically your character's drive, which sounds very commercial, but it's whatever it is your character wants and dreams of, like deep inside, you know, they might not even know they dream of this thing. So usually in a screenplay, your character has like an immediate dumb goal, like a simple goal. You know, I want to get a job, you know, at a such and such place or something. There's always a because, though. There's a reason. I want to get a job at such and such place because that, you know, gorgeous girl, like, you know, works next door and I'm going to run into her. She's going to be the love of my life and my life will be perfect. So if you think of your spine as your character attempting to make their life perfect, whatever that is, it can be a little dumb thing. It can be like, okay, I'm going to take my dad on a road trip to get the sandwich he's always wanted, and that's going to make my life perfect. You know, that's kind of the subtext of it. Like, what is going to complete my life? And it can be tiny, it can be massive. You know, I want to be the world champion at something, or, you know, I just want to survive in the next 24 hours, you know, whatever it is. That goal or the problem and the goal are kind of the same thing. The problem is basically, how can I fix this thing? You know, like, I don't know, there's a terrible example popped into my mind, but like hangover movies, you know, how can I fix this chaos? Or a goal, which is you either, you know your goal by around page 10, there's a tip for you, by around page 10. But the reason you're pursuing that goal is a deeper thing. And that's why it needs a writer, a good storyteller who understands character. That deeper reason that is underneath that goal is the thing that is satisfying and cathartic at the end of your story. It's not like we're interested in seeing someone, you know, steal a car if that's their mission. We're interested if when they steal a car, they have a reason, a big reason that is important to them, you know, and it's usually primal. It's usually about family, security, love, belonging. It's some deep, you know, primal dream underneath. Hope that answers your question. Yeah,
I think that does. That's a good understanding of spine and a new one for me. So that is valuable. These are some really great tips. We have another one from Heather, another question from Heather. Can one learn screenwriting without taking courses?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm totally self-taught, although it took a while. Yeah, you can. I would honestly just read as many screenplays as you can online. Just read them. Start to get the feeling for the pacing of it and the language. And, you know, there are variations in how people write, like, and screenplay books, some, you know, some of them are amazing. One of the good story books that I always like that many people respond to is this writer's journey. Christopher Vogler uses the hero's journey, you know, all the myth studies and whatnot. So the writer's journey is a really good book, but there are tons of really great books, and just read screenplays, honestly. And then if you read a screenplay, then see the film and then read the screenplay again, you know, kind of you'll start putting it together. That is all you'll be learning in film school, honestly. You don't need to go to film school. And courses help because like every week, if you have to produce pages, like in my class, you have to produce 5 pages a week, no matter what. So that's terrifying to have other people read those 5 pages every week, but it's really good because you're trying to entertain them, entertain yourself, and soon you get some momentum. That's a nice thing about classes, to find other people who are kind of like-minded. So yeah.
Writers respond to deadlines too. It's true. It's a cold hard fact. So yeah, okay, that's great. Do we have any more questions for our guests? If so, type it into the YouTube chat. And in the meantime, I'll say thanks very much, Tricia, for being here tonight and for sharing your hot tips for us, because this is really valuable information. And it sounds like, I mean, you make it all sound so doable.
It is just work. It's consistent work. That's it. Yeah, and revisions.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, one last call for questions before we send Tricia off on her merry way. All right.
Well, great, because we're doing great for time then. It is pretty much 7. Look at us, all on time. Love it. So usually at this point, at 7, we would take a break, but without the break, like online, we would hand around a pitcher for pay what you can donations to help support Brockton and our writers. But we can't pass a picture online. It's a pandemic no-no. So we've set up a PayPal account. So you can go to paypal.me/BrocktonWriters if you're able to spare a few dollars for our brilliant writers. That will be dropped in the comments as well, that link. We would love your donations. They help us pay our writers, they help us keep going, and we know in person you would, you know, put your toonies in the picture, but in the absence of that, this is what you can do for us. So now we're going to move on, and again, please type your questions in the chat as they occur to you, because there is a lag. Next up we have Ryanne Kap. Ryanne Kap is a Chinese-Canadian writer from Strathroy, Ontario. Her work has been featured in Grain Magazine, Feel Zine, Carte Blanche, and elsewhere. In 2020, her short story Heat won first place in Grain Magazine's Short Grain Contest. Congratulations, Ryanne.
Cool. Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you, Dorian and Emily, for organizing this. I'm so happy to be here. Okay, so just a heads up with this short story, there's some mention of violent content, so just a heads up. This is called Point of No Return. Oh, shoot, sorry, I went to the bottom of the doc. Okay. Rebecca looks at the knife in Ellie's stomach. It's strange to think she put it there. Ellie looks up at the sky. She tries to remember what it was like to not be internally bleeding. Other than her heaving breaths, it's quiet in the forest. It really hurts, Ellie says. I think I hit your liver, Rebecca says. Well, that'll do it. Rebecca hasn't always hated Ellie. Until a couple weeks ago, she only hated her on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which are the days they carpool from school together because they both have after-school commitments. Rebecca banned Ellie drama. Their mothers, who have been passive-aggressively feuding for years, coordinate on this and this alone. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she's shoved up against Ellie's brilliance, forced to see the way she draws all the light in a room toward her. From the backstage of the auditorium, Rebecca has a perfect view of the way everyone orbits around Ellie. In comparison, she's nothing. But it wouldn't have been so bad if not for what happened 2 weeks ago. Josh Henderson, an alto sax with ridiculously full lips, asked Rebecca if she was going to the semi-formal dance in October. Rebecca, who has minimal experience speaking to boys, only stared in response. Josh laughed nervously and then asked if she knew about Ellie. On the car rides home, Ellie often texts a guy named Bones, who is definitely not actually named Bones. Rebecca has glanced an eggplant emoji once or twice, but she can't say if it's anything serious. I don't know, she said. Could you ask her? I guess. Cool. After Ellie's mother dropped her off, Rebecca raced to her room and looked up Josh Henderson on Facebook. His profile picture was a landscape, but she was pretty sure it was him. They had 3 mutual friends. Rebecca refreshed it. 4 mutual friends. The newest one was Ellie. It's not that I like Josh, Rebecca says. Ellie's still bleeding out, but a lot slower now. The least Rebecca can give her is an explanation. I don't care, Ellie wheezes. She's trying to guess how much time she has left. It's not enough. I just don't understand why he likes you. This is a lie. Ellie is the son, but now doesn't seem like the time to tell her that. Maybe it's because I don't stab people, Ellie says. She punctuates it with a cough that seems to cost her everything. Stabbing was the last resort, Rebecca says. I was going to poison you first. Oh, Ellie gasps. Cool. But you wouldn't drink the chocolate milk. For as long as Rebecca has known Ellie, chocolate milk has been her favorite drink. She used to down it by the gallon. In 5th grade, the other girls started calling her brown cow. Rebecca told off the other girls by explaining, in painful and unnecessary detail, that there was actually no correlation between brown cows and chocolate milk. Ellie appreciated the intention of the defense more than its execution. Nevertheless, the girls' taunts were effective, and for a short time, Ellie only drank water. Her skin looked great, but Rebecca knew she was miserable. It was mostly because her dad had died of a heart attack the year before. It was the kind of tragedy that solidified their friendship, both of them in awe of how much ruin grief could bring. The two of them complemented each other, balanced out each other's intensity. Rebecca had a determination that Ellie admired, a bare-knuckled hardness to her that seemed like safety. Ellie had a conditional kind of warmth, able to be sunny one moment and cold the next, but there was a great kindness in her that made Rebecca both infuriated and infatuated. It was Rebecca who got her to drink a carton of chocolate milk she'd bought from the convenience store, and it was Ellie who printed out Adele sheet music so Rebecca could perform a haunting flute cover of Rolling in the Deep. Together, they hid tiny containers of expired milk in the other girls' lockers and laughed when they complained of the smell. Then high school came with all its promise of reinvention, and Ellie saw her chance for more. This is how Rebecca remembers it. Ellie standing by the dumpsters, throwing out the matching pink sneakers they bought at Payless, ambition gleaming in her eyes. Something from Lord of the Rings playing in the background, all Scandinavian choirs and ominous trumpets. She showed up the next day with red Converse, and the rest was history. Ellie joined drama and got a lead role on her first try. Rebecca joined band and became second flute. Ellie had 3 boyfriends in as many months and 1 pregnancy scandal that made everyone like her even more. Rebecca ran for treasurer and lost because she couldn't get enough signatures on the application form. Ellie became the sun, and Rebecca a meteor outshone by her radiance. But Rebecca had her moments. She could play flute pretty well, and the people in junior band tolerated her more than anyone else did. In that room, she filled a role. She was necessary, and if she wasn't a star, at least she was part of something. Something that had been spoiled immediately and ruthlessly the moment Ellie's name left Josh's lips. In that moment, Rebecca knew there was no place she could be safe from her, unless, she thought after, she made Ellie go away. Now Ellie is lying on the ground, having regained her breath, but not much of her strength. With her hair found out across the crumpling leaves, she looks regal. Above her, the birds are singing. Ellie could simply be lounging in the autumn sunlight, if not for the blood stain on her Licenza shirt. Why didn't you drink the milk? Rebecca asks. What? It was in the carton you always liked. Royal blue, the kind you could imagine missing kids' faces on. I'm on a diet, Ellie says. No sugar. Oh, Rebecca says. I wish you would have told me. We don't talk anymore. I know, but still, it would have saved a lot of time. You're taking so long to die. Ellie wisely stays quiet. It's wrong, it's all wrong. Rebecca's voice is like a storm cloud. The stabbing's too traumatic. They'll get hung up on the details and then you'll really never die. What do you mean? I mean, I'm sick of you, Ellie, Rebecca says. You're everywhere and I'm sick of it. Everyone loves you and you love everyone except me. You used to love me. Rebecca, you could have taken me with you, but you left me. You left me and this is what you get. Ellie's voice shifts into overdrive. The adrenaline's kicking in. It's not too late. Rebecca, I could fix this. We could fix this. Rebecca smiles, the poor thing. If I let you go, you'll tell people I tried to kill you. That's not going to make them like me very much. You don't know that, Ellie says. Maybe they'll think it's cool. I doubt it, Rebecca says. The day Rebecca was born was a Tuesday. It was 2 p.m. and the hospital TV was playing a rerun of Jeopardy. Rebecca's mother was bored. It wasn't that Rebecca's birth didn't hurt. It was that she had already had 3 children with 3 different men, and Rebecca's father was the least exciting of all her affairs. Similarly, Rebecca was the least exceptional of her children, or so had always seemed. The morning of, she watched her daughter pack up her bag. She didn't see the bulge of the hunting knife in the front pocket. She was thinking of Ellie's mother, whose email address she'd been using to sign up for various free trials. That afternoon, as Rebecca headed toward the forest, she thought of the visitation for Ellie's father. Rebecca's mother had shown up drunk, initiating the feud between her and Ellie's mother, but their daughters were too busy building a tower out of cucumber sandwiches to notice the tension. Instead, Rebecca remembered Ellie's face, how fragile it had seemed, how desperate she was to protect her. You know, I wouldn't leave you, she'd said. Ellie let the sandwiches fall. He didn't leave me, she said. He died. Sorry, Rebecca said quickly. I just mean, I won't. Okay, Ellie said. She rebuilt the tower. As Rebecca slipped through the trees, knife in hand, it occurred to her that she should have made Ellie promise it back. Maybe things would have been different if she had, but it was a waste to think about the maybes. She approached the clearing where Ellie waited for a maybe boyfriend that would never come. There was only now, only this. Rebecca pulls up a WikiHow on staunching a stab wound. I don't know, it looks kind of complicated, she says. Ellie makes claws of her hands. The sound that comes from her is not quite human. Do it. Rebecca checks out the stab wound. It looks nearly black now. She'll have to get her hands dirty. The cartoon man from the wiki looks like he's judging her. She stares down at Ellie. Here, minutes from death, she doesn't look that hot. She's not the sun. She's just some small animal lying there in the dirt. There's a sadness to her, some kind of deficiency. The realization feels like something caving in. I think it's too late, Rebecca says with a shrug. Sorry. The day Ellie was born was a Friday. She was the first and most loved of 2 siblings. Her mother gave birth in a kiddie pool in their backyard at 7 p.m. She was listening to James Taylor. Ellie's father watched from the back porch. He thought his wife's decision to give birth, unmedicated, in the same place where their chocolate Labrador took its daily shits was strange. At his visitation, Ellie didn't recognize the body in the casket. Everyone apologized or gave her sympathetic looks, but she barely understood why. In the years that followed, she buried herself and other people. Anything to forget the emptiness she'd seen on her father's face, the complete lack. It's what she thought of in those final moments, looking at Rebecca. Nothing. Ellie's words come fast now. I don't get why you had to do this in the first place, she says. Her eyes flutter wildly. I want people to see me, Rebecca says, like they see you. Rebecca strokes the side of Ellie's face. It's such a pretty face, so breakable. Ellie reaches up with one bloodied hand. She places it gently on Rebecca's cheek and draws her in. Screw you, Rebecca, Ellie says. With the other hand, she pulls out the knife and slashes it at Rebecca's face, catching her across the eyebrow. Rebecca sighs, catches Ellie's hand, and drives the knife into Ellie's neck. This time she doesn't scream. Rebecca looks down at her ruined body. Well, she says. The rest of the plan goes seamlessly. She's learned most of it from Google, using incognito mode, of course. When she's done with Ellie, she knows they won't find her for a long, long time. She stands up, dusts the leaves off her skirt, and begins the long walk home. The following Tuesday, Rebecca is back in the music room. Apart from a shifted carpool schedule, not much has changed. In the first few days, when they searched for Ellie, Rebecca made herself a talking point. She knew Ellie best back in the day. She couldn't imagine anyone wanting to hurt her. She got 5 new friend requests and an invitation to smoke pot after class. Of course, the attention shifted to Ellie's friends and Ellie's family and Bones, who turned out to be a senior named Tim Pullman, but it didn't matter. The cops will come around soon enough. They'll ask the kids and they'll all point to her. The girl who knew her, the girl who loved her. Tim won't mean a thing. Nothing is purer than friendship. So Rebecca waits. She explains her scars as self-piercing gone wrong. Soon enough they'll come. Until then, she'll keep herself busy. During band practice, Josh plays a note flat instead of sharp. It's a small mistake, but even one weak cog can break the entire machine. After, as they pack up their instruments, Rebecca quietly mentions his error. Oh, Josh says, my bad, thanks. Rebecca smiles. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Ryanne. That was incredible. I was literally on the edge of my seat for that, and just not expecting that to go the way it went. And it's just really wonderful. Great writing. Thank you. Next up, we have Therese Estacion, who is part of the Visayan diaspora community. She is an elementary school teacher and is studying to be a psychotherapist. Therese is also a bilateral below knee and partial hands amputee and identifies as a disabled person or person with a disability. Therese lives in Toronto, and her poems have been published in CV2 and Pank magazine. Phantom Pains is her first book, and it was just released on the 31st of March. Welcome, Therese.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Thanks, Ryanne, and thanks, Dorian, and thanks, Emily. I'm going to read from my book, Phantom Pains. The first set of poems I wrote about my time in the ICU. ICU 1. The trachea leaves my throat like steel wool. I swallow once and demand water. And solid food, any food. They force me to wait, to drink. And I'm only allowed to eat crushed ice. Tony, my nurse, gives in and feeds me crushed orange pops. Everyone is mad that I am mad. No drinking, no liquids, no satisfaction. My tonsils corrode. Rust spreads inside. ICU 2. I am floating jello, dizzy gelatinous pancake with a wobbling cranium, a big baby with a jellied neck. I practice sitting up, first in a wheelchair with a headrest, my head swinging like loose molecules. Time to practice sitting up. 10 minutes today, twice that much tomorrow. No headrest. But the nurse forgets about time and eats her lunch. My jelly neck stays up for 23 minutes, or 1,380 seconds. I almost become vomit. Resisting being a jellied woman mopped up. ICU 3. I arrive at a laugh 5 seconds late, like a damaged cuckoo clock. New and bizarre baby, reading their lips for the punchline, offering them beige eyes that slowly make their way down past wormholes and old wood that rots the sun. The next poem I'll be reading, it's the fourth poem from a series of poems called Eunuch Female. And it's about a little bit of medical history here. I also suffered a hysterectomy. EF4. Vaginal dryness, a condition that afflicts most post-menopausal women and hysterectomied women. Purgatory is dry. Necrotic fingers above gangrene are dry. Post-rehab life is very dry. Eunuch Female used to confess about masturbating. She used to lie and say she was always dry. EF. I am now disabled and dry. Desperate. Lover leave me. Pursue warmer sex. Lover come back. I will prove I'm still sticky. Gynecologist tells EF that it's not sexual to moisturize your vagina every day. Besides, the walls are looking pale, less fleshy. Women in their 30s are supposed to get their second win. EF, of course. Eunuch Female buys expensive organic lube and pours cups of it on her amputated hand. On the bottle, it reads, to prevent mummification of vagina, pour daily. She rubs like a child. She wants to keep L and visit him wherever he is. Continue attempts at de-euthanization, knowing there will be no miracle child. L comes and goes, comes again, goes again. goes and comes in the way one flosses a street dog's teeth for the first time. While he is absent, EF decides to take advantage of being alone. Alone, she closes a door, open, and touches her vagina. Touches and touches and touches. Fries to sizzle. Fries, fries to sizzle. Hello? The next poem I'll be reading, it's a poem about a merman that my dad said lived in the island he was from. It's an island in the Visayan province called Kihulngan, and I'll be speaking some of my language. It's called Afloat. Gingnan ko sa akong papa na naiukoy. My papa told me that there was a merman, nagpuyut dapit sa dagat, who lived by the sea in his hometown of Gihulngan. This merman and his family lived there for years as fishermen. My papa told me that hibalo siya na ukoy sila kay baho kayo siyag buwad. He knew he was a merman because he smelt so badly like fried, dried salt fish, had green skin and webbed fingers and toes. Papa said he once saw him dive into the water from his boat, hunting sa dagat in the sea for days. When he finally emerged, he had a string of dalopapa, giant squid, hanging from his neck. I think about this merman often when I'm sitting in my prosthetist's office without my legs on. Seeing my limbs halved without feet makes me wonder if I am a fish person as well. Maybe somewhere down my bloodline, a perverted lola or grandma had fantastic sex with an ukwe. Or maybe they did what they used to do to their unwanted girls, dump them in the water. Perhaps I was always meant to be the child who had to pay debt to all their libidinal bestiality and female infanticide, an offering for my souls, for their souls. The next poem I'm going to read, it's called Aswang. She's another sort of monster from the Philippines, and she's kind of like a vampire, but she can dismember herself. Aswang. An aswang is a type of a bat that eats flesh. Aswangs are found all across the islands and vary in form and personality. One story of a known female aswang in Cebu goes like this. Sexy by day, at night she moves any way she pleases. Sometimes she ends up at the disco where she laughs, magsayo-sayo siya ug maghubog, dances and gets drunk. She laughs and pretends she's interested in your cock, excuses herself, leaves, finds a hiding spot, dismembers. Hides her legs by the garbage, grows fangs and wings, becomes hideous but keeps her perky tits. Og muhawat siya sa ato, and she waits for you perched on the roof. Paglakaw na nimo, when you leave, that's when she gets you. Hunt, swoop, crunch, and glug. Dayon, then, she puts herself back together again, full. Trapuhan niya yung tutoy, cleans her tits, struts home. There is one way to catch her, though, if you had the courage. This aswang has never figured out what to do with her intestines. So if you ever find yourself walking out at night and see a long, moist cord swaying in the dark, run. Pero ako siyang atangan, but I wait longingly for her. I wish I was her. I wish I could put back together my dismembered body, snapping my bones inside, tucking in my loose muscles and nerves, folding in my fangs and wings, and sulod sa akong lawas, daghan gyud og sundang. Inside my body, thousands of knives. I wish to be like her, the whore butcher with a swinging rectum. The last poem I'm going to read to you, it's the fifth poem in my Eunuch Female series. And I wrote this, I spent some time in Denede, or Yellowknife as they call it. And it's of me on the ice road on Great Slave Lake. EF5. It has been 2 years and Eunuch Female can now do two very important things. Wipe her own ass, drive. Lover escapes again, this time to north of 60, hoping to start anew. Eunuch Female follows him, desperate for more than sex. He obliges unwillingly, willingly again, a hopeful adventure on Tiger Rock. The aurora is thick with green particles and they fight often. Often they spoon. Often she's alone and waits and watches the fox burrow and travel across the ice road while he skis the pain away. When she feels like mold, she drives into the frozen lake, takes her dead uterus and places her in the passenger seat. Last night, Elle wondered again if it was his fault. Was it the dirty lube, The butt stuff? No, so don't stop making love, she reminds him. A sundog interrupts and shines on her flaccid uterus. All 3 suns seem real and steady with heat. She pockets her uterus and slowly walks to a part of the freshly plowed ice. She peeks into the patch and tries to figure out how deep the freeze reaches. The wind scrapes the fissured fleck lake. Uterus says out loud, "They say only 2.9 out of a million people get the bacteria." EF. Fusobacterium necrophorum? Uterus. No one knows where you got it from. We are a miracle. Remember? Remind L again. EF. Sure. Uterus. Well, at least you don't want to kill yourself anymore. EF. That's even more tiring. At home, lover calls her and asks what kind of chips she wants and how much ricotta to buy for the lasagna. The birthday card he gave her sits on the table. It reads, "Through wind and snow." Outside, the light pushes past 5 p.m. again. Soon, the sun will begin to strong-arm the snow and stay. Eunuch Female holds Uterus up to the window and checks for specks. A black raven interrupts them and flies. Something new cycles. A rock waits for 1 billion years, waits for them to arrive, gives them dreams. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was incredible.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Next up, we have Waubgeshig Rice, an author and journalist from Waubgeshig First Nation. He has written 3 fiction titles and short stories and essays and has been published in numerous anthologies. His most recent novel, Moon of the Crested Snow, was published in 2018. It's great and became a national bestseller. He graduated from Ryerson University's journalism program in 2002 and spent most of his journalism career with the CBC as a video journalist and radio host. He left them in 2020 to focus on his literary career. He lives in Sudbury, Ontario with his wife and 2 sons. Take it away, Wob.
Miigwech, Ryanne, thank you very much for having me. Thanks to you and Emily for putting everything together. Big thanks to Jen for hosting tonight via the Ephemera series. And it's great to be back with the Brockton Writers series. I first read back in 2015 at a bar somewhere in Toronto, can't remember exactly where. So it's really nice to be able to reconnect online with you all this time around. So Miigwech, thank you very much for having me. I will read a little bit from Moon of the Crested Snow. It is my most recent work. It is a story of Northern Ontario Anishinaabe community that endures a world-ending blackout, and the community is sort of left to figure out a way forward in the new dark era. And then some unexpected visitors come from the south, and they have to make some tough decisions about their future. So I'm going to read a couple of quick chapters from sort of the first half of the story. The first chapter picks up about a week after the blackout, and some of the community leadership has gathered to try to figure out what to do. And then the chapter immediately after is a moment between the 2 protagonists, who are a young couple named Nicole and Evan. So again, Miigwech for having me. Really fun to be here tonight. So here is a little bit of Moon of the Crested Snow. Oh, and just a quick warning, there is a little bit of profane language in these passages, but at the end of the world, I think we'll be saying some F-bombs here and there. So just beware of some swear words here. So chapter 10. 3 more cold nights passed. The generator power would only last so long. The chief called another emergency meeting at the band office, this time with just counselors and select staff. There was still no communication with anyone in the outside world. The chief, Terry, leaned over the front desk in the main foyer, staring at his hands. The wind howled outside, blowing snow across the walkway to the front door. At this point, Terry said, his voice cracking, I think we should just send out a second notice. Another meeting will just make them really panic. Amanda Jones stepped away from the wall behind him and spoke up. What do we tell him? We don't know anything. The bangles on her wrists clanked as she gestured out and upward, as if to raise the confusion to the ceiling. I think we just tell him to be patient, said Walter, who was leaning against the desk. We got to tell him that this is the new status quo for the time being, to keep conserving power and water. Evan watched each of the council members closely. They looked tired. He could see the worry and fatigue in Amanda's eyes. She was only a few years older than he was. Terry sighed. All right, Joanne, do up another one. Joanne wheeled back to the keyboard. Her son Tyler moved to stand behind her. Although he was there as a staffer, he was also there to support his mother. She'd been having a particularly tough time over the past week. Kevin, Tyler's younger brother, was attending college down in Gibson for welding. Bright and ambitious, he planned to get his education and spend a few years working in Southern Ontario before returning home. No one had been able to contact him since they'd been cut off. That was over a week ago. He was one of 9 from the community living elsewhere for their post-secondary education. Amanda's little brother Nick was at the same college as Kevin. Joanne tapped out the message, printed off a copy, and brought it back to the chief. It read, "Notice, ongoing community-wide power and communications outage. Emergency power generation remains in effect. Please conserve energy and water where possible. Use wood stoves and furnaces as primary heat sources. Monitor your water pipes. Food delivery scheduled for next week. Please ration in the meantime. Next update Monday. Have a good weekend. Miigwech, Chief and Counsel." Terry turned to the others. Should we really say there's a delivery coming? Walter smoothed back his graying ponytail. Well, we originally worked it out with Donnie for next week. That's still the schedule. Yeah, but we haven't heard from anyone in more than a week. We don't know what the fuck is going on out there. Terry, relax. We'll be okay, said Walter. That's easy for you to say. I'm supposed to be the goddamn leader here. What am I going to do? Deliver these bullshit pieces of paper to every single fucking home on this res and tell everyone it's going to be okay? We have no goddamn answers. Terry, take it easy. It was Amanda's turn to try to calm the chief. There's something seriously fucked up going on out there. Why haven't we heard from anyone? Why is the power still off? If we run out of that diesel, all the water lines are going to freeze. Then it's going to be chaos here. Terry slammed his fist against the desk. Fuck. Joanne jumped and the others winced or stared at their feet. Walter gazed at Terry from under his furrowed brows. Evan felt the tension rising between the two. As this crisis unfolded, he found himself gravitating towards Walter, who always kept his cool and had calming and confident demeanor. Print them up, Joanne. Tyler, Evan, take them out, commanded Walter. They're going to want to hear something from us, and this is all we can do. Terry inhaled deeply and looked at the floor. I'm sorry for getting mad. You guys can all go home now. Someone will come and get you when you need to meet again. Joanne turned back to the computer screen and slid the mouse about in short bursts to print more copies. Tyler squeezed her shoulders and leaned down to kiss the top of her head. She let out a cough to stifle a sob. This is chapter 11. Hey, wake up. Nicole nudged Evan again. He opened his eyes in the pitch black bedroom. He couldn't tell if he was awake or still sleeping. Evan, wake up. Her elbow in his side stirred him out of his deep sleep, but it was the tremble in her voice and her rigid body that really woke him. I'm awake. What's up? I had a really weird dream. Oh, yeah? Yeah, I'm scared. He turned to face Nicole and inched closer. Come here, he said. She buried her face into his t-shirt. What was your dream? I dreamt that me and the kids were outside, she said, and we were trying to run through the snow. But it was that kind of snow that's hard on top and real powdery underneath. Nungos was on one side and Mine Gun was on the other. I was holding their hands real tight. I was trying to run on top of the snow, but I kept falling through every couple steps. The kids would pull me back up and we'd start running again until I fell back through. I don't know what we were running from or running to, but we had to get somewhere. You weren't around anywhere. The kids kept saying stuff like, don't worry, mommy, and we're gonna make it. But it wasn't their same voices. It was like they were elders speaking to me. They were calm. They were smiling at me every time they pulled me up from the snow. I was getting tired and they made sure I made it out of there. I was falling deeper and deeper into the snow every time the crust broke. Then I finally fell in over my head. I was struggling trying to get up. The snow was getting in my eyes and in my mouth. I thought I was gonna suffocate, but they reached all the way down to pull me back up. This time their hands felt bigger. Evan lay perfectly still, listening. He stroked the top of Nicole's head, soothing her while he grew increasingly frightened. She sniffled and he knew she was on the verge of crying. They pulled me all the way to the surface up to my feet, but we weren't running anymore. We were in the middle of the bush and there was a whole bunch of other people there. There was a fire going. It looked like a winter camping site. I turned back to face Mine Gun and Nungos, but I saw a young man and a young woman wearing old patched up snowmobile suits. They both had long hair that flowed so beautifully. They smiled at me and I knew it was them. It was our kids, but they were adults all grown up. They started talking to me in the old language and I didn't understand them. It was a place I didn't recognize. I didn't recognize anyone else there either. I was panicking. Then Nungos reached out to grab my hand. She squeezed it tight and looked into my eyes. Her eyes were so big and brown. Her cheeks were so high and proud. Her hair fell so beautifully down the sides of her face. She was the strongest and prettiest young woman. Then she reached up and touched my cheek. She said, "Welcome home, Mommy." And then I woke up. Chimiigwech, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wab. It's a delight to hear it read too. Next up, we have Elizabeth Hirst, who is a Canadian horror author, graduate of the Odyssey Fantasy Writing Workshop class of 2006, and an editor of books and short stories. Her writing on LGBT themes in horror fiction has appeared on Tor.com and The Scariest Part, and her novels, The Face in the Marsh and Distant Early Warning, are available from Renaissance Press. Welcome, Liz.
Thank you so much, Emily. Today I will be reading from my latest book, Distant Early Warning. And so a little bit of background on the book. So in a world where climate change has fully taken hold, people start finding that starting in the very far north and coming down, the dead are rising from the ground at night and screaming. And people are doing terrible things and they don't know why. And everything is just chaos, and people are flooding down as far south into Canada as they can go. And nobody knows why this is happening or what to do about it. And in the midst of all of this, my main character, Denny, sees her drifter dad as one of these creatures, and she doesn't know why he died or what happened to him. And so she quits her job and takes her dad's dog, who has come to her a few weeks before under mysterious circumstances, and sets off into the wilderness to find out what happened to him and hopefully put him to rest. So what the point I'm going to read from the story is Denny has joined forces with a dodgy ex-journalist who is trying to lead her to where her dad died, and she and Wayne and Jeff are making their way through the wilderness, and that is where we'll begin. Trigger warning: mild swearing and some animal violence. The chapter is Damn Dog. The sun rose, and the air in the tent got muggy. Denny emerged from the tent to a pale pink sky turning to blue, like a giant dome of cotton candy. She tested the air, fresh, moving well with a slight breeze, and tinged with the scent of pine and that strange sun-baked rock smell that was hard to put your finger on. Judging from the lack of clouds, a miracle on a fall day as warm as this, they would have a full day of clear hiking ahead of them. Soon after she emerged, Wayne and Jeff staggered out into the sunshine as well. Wayne gave a friendly wave and went behind the pine tree to relieve himself. For his sake, Denny turned around. That pine tree wouldn't hide a pencil. From the look of his hair, though, and the blanket marks on his face, he'd slept at least a little. They packed up in the shortest amount of time yet, and as the rocks heated up and the air got wavy, they began the hike again toward the tower in the far distance. Denny took a lot of long pulls on her water, hoping against hope that the lake up ahead would have a running tributary somewhere. She had filled up briefly at the power plant, but her stores were getting low. Her stomach turned a little at drinking water that had just been sitting around in the woods, but she'd just have to break out the purification tablets and hope for the best. She looked down at Jeff, striding along beside her with his tongue hanging out of his mouth. Oh, to have the stomach of a dog. He'd be able to drink just about everything, barring a serious case of industrial pollution. As the two of them moved closer to the tower in the distance, Denny saw that it was an aged wooden structure, the kind whose paint had all peeled off and whose boards had turned gray with age. They came over the crest of a slow decline that they hadn't seen in the distance, and she soon noticed that around the base of the tower was a jumble of buildings made out of more of the same weathered wood and corrugated steel. There had once been a chain-link fence around the whole compound, but now it slouched to the ground, worn down by years of wind and rust. Wayne stopped when the rest of the compound came into sight. Looks like an abandoned mine. I know it's daytime, but all the same, I'd rather stay out. We don't really need supplies, and who knows what's in there waiting around to get tripped on, he said. Denny thought to herself that the only thing Wayne was worried about was tripping on another pile of bones, but she said nothing. No sense pouring salt in his wounds.
Despite there being no real practical purpose to going into the mine complex, she had secretly been looking forward to checking it out during the day, ever since they saw the tower in the distance. All present circumstances aside, there was something fascinating about old abandoned buildings. Their age, perhaps, or the strange treasures from the past that still lingered in forgotten corners and piles of rotten wood. Yeah, as much as I kind of want to look around, you're probably right, she replied. Let's head for the lake. I'm hoping the water there is clean enough to drink. From the top of the slope, they made their way left of the mine complex, heading for the ring of tall yellowed grass that surrounded the small lake. As they traveled, the shield rock broke up more, becoming topsoil and small plants again. The wind blew against their faces, breaking up the sweltering heat and bringing with it the smell of fresh water. Certainly, poisoned water could smell fresh, but at least Denny could bet that they wouldn't arrive at the water's edge to find it choked with stinking algae. The edges of Lake Ontario stank so badly of it in the late summer and early fall that the people living along the waterfront planned to flee inland during those months. Combine that with mounds of goose poo from the giant flocks that covered the parks and, well, Denny had always felt thankful to live in the interior of the city rather than along the lake shore. They arrived at the edge of the lake at around 3 o'clock. With any luck, Denny would have time to test the water. Then they could move far enough away from the mine complex by dusk to avoid any unpleasantness. When they reached the water, Denny kneeled down and scooped up some of the water in her hand. There was no oil sheen on top, and the water didn't feel oily or warm up the way some chemical contaminants will do when she rubbed it between her fingers. After a little boiling and some purification tablets, it would probably be fine. She took off her backpack, fished out her water containers, and dipped them one by one in the water until they were full. As she was loading them back into the pack, she felt a hand touch her shoulder softly, as if Wayne didn't want to startle her. A finger extended into her vision, pointing across the lake. Slowly she turned. How they'd missed the bear looking back, she would never know. But there it was, larger than even she had expected, as big as a micro-compact car. It waded into the lake, its white and tan fur floating on the water as it sunk in. This was no ordinary bear. This was one of the polar grizzly hybrids that had been proliferating ever since the Arctic started to melt. So far, it hadn't noticed them. Denny picked up her backpack, dropping it onto one shoulder. The weight of the pack caused a shooting pain to travel up her neck, but it would hurt more if the bear caught on. She groped backward, grasping onto Wayne's shirt, then pushing him back. They backed away slowly together for a few steps, until she remembered Jeff. His lead was on the ground to the right, and at the end of its vibrant S-curve, Jeff stood at attention, tail up, neck straight, sniffing the air. Denny reached down slowly for the lead. Her hand hooked around the loop after what felt like hours of groping around blindly on the ground. She pulled up on the leash slowly, steadily. Jeff's license tags ran out like the peal of a bell on the silent plain. The Pisley's head twitched toward them, and its tiny glittering eyes locked on them. It rose on 2 feet out of the water and roared, lake water spittle flying from its outstretched lips. Before Denny and Jeff could react, the bear charged toward them, fast and direct as a freight train, its immense bulk flapping up and down with every bound. Denny fumbled for her gun, but her fingers were numb, frozen. By the time she found the stock and yanked it from its strapping, the bear was 10 feet away and closing, and all she saw was teeth and deadly claws. Wayne screamed her name and pulled on her, but that only caused her to stumble, suddenly off balance. A flash of black and white rushed into the space between them and the bear. Jeff skidded to a stop in front of her, barking and snarling, ears down, using all of his 60-pound body to project aggression. Wayne yanked her arm then, and, as if smashed from a block of ice, her numb legs moved, pounding away behind him toward the mining complex in the distance. Denny turned to look back, not caring if she hit a rock or a gopher hole. "Jeff!" she screamed. "Jeff, come!" She knew he heard her, but Jeff stayed in the distance, a crouched figure blocking the bear's way, turn which way it might. Damn dog. Damn loyal dog. She kept running, alternately thanking him and cursing him in her mind, tears pouring down her face as she commanded him with her heart to come. A yelp cut through the air, and this time she didn't have the heart to look back. Dun dun dun, I'll leave it on that cliffhanger. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I especially love the I especially love the dun 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 music. So we have some questions hopefully piling up in the YouTube chat. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you to everyone for reading tonight. Who would have thought that with such dark and terrifying and horrible themes that it would be such a delight? Well, it has absolutely been a delight. So thank you so much, all of you, for your part in that. These are dark times, and even with dark material, it can be a delight to gather together and to hear everyone's words. So thank you so much for your words tonight. For the folks viewing at home, thank you for providing your questions in the comments. If you have a question now, please type it in. Please note that we'll only read questions that are respectful of our authors and their work and that do not promote any sort of oppression. And because I don't see any coming in just yet,
we've got lots of lovely comments. Lovely comments about how wonderful all your work is. No specific questions yet, but everybody loves all of your work, as do we.
So I'm just going to say, because of the dark themes, do most of you, I'm going to ask this of everyone, do most of you write with dark themes exclusively, or do you write cheerful stuff occasionally too? Okay, go ahead, Elizabeth, sorry.
I have a funny story about that, because when I started writing, I identified primarily with fantasy. That's mostly what I read in high school and younger, and just, that was my leisure reading, some science fiction. But I also like the really creepy parts of Tolkien, like the Witch King and Moria and Minas Morgul and like all that stuff. So I always thought that was the coolest parts, like the way he described all of that stuff. And so I started writing what I thought was fantasy, and I kept getting rejections that were going, sorry, this is horror. And so I do write fantasy sometimes, and a lot of my stuff bridges into fantasy, but it always ends up having a dark aspect to it. Although I do have a story coming out in A Quiet Afternoon 2 this summer, which is, I mean, the title might make it sound dark. It's a story about a magical knitter set in the pandemic called Knitting Through the Apocalypse, but that's more on the lighter side of what I do, and it's more of a humor and fantasy.
How about Ryanne?
Yeah, I was going back and forth over whether I should read the story, because I'm like, it's a lot. It's the only story I have featuring a teenage murderer. So none of my other stuff, is quite this dark. I feel like it all tends to be kind of angsty, small town stuff. So I don't feel like I ever write anything happy. But yeah, I think this is as dark as it gets for me.
Yeah, well, I was kind of thinking when you were reading that, like, oh, I know that, we programmed somebody tonight who's like a horror writer, which is Liz, and then you're reading your story, and I'm like, well, this is actually very graphically horror as well, which I think just speaks as well to how these kind of genre divisions are, made up. We make them up, and they're liminal, and we can cross them. Wob, do you have anything to say about this?
Yeah, well, I try to be humorous when I can, and I think part of that is just partially a general trauma response to colonialism. Being Indigenous, I think coming from a First Nation, there's a lot of trauma in our history, but one thing that always brings me home is the humor and the comedy that brings a lot of people together in response to some of those tough things. So I purposely tried to inject that into even like the darker stories I'm doing about the end of the world, right? And also I've found that a lot of that comes up naturally just due to the upbringing I've had and the influences around me, right? So yeah, it works in a couple of ways. Sometimes I try really hard to just balance that all out, but sometimes I find it comes naturally just due to, you know, Indigenous culture in general. So yeah, that's a big part of what I try to do too.
Thank you so much. Therese?
Yeah, I think I start from darkness and then kind of try to reach towards the light a little bit. I don't know how successful I am. Maybe I just kind of get to like Twilight or whatever. But I think, you know, the writing that has come up, it's just my way to, like Wob said, you know, deal with my own personal trauma. And I use my writing as a catharsis. So obviously when I'm editing it and thinking about the audience, I'm very careful that I don't want it to be trauma porn. And so I see where I can kind of distance myself from my trauma, because that's ultimately what I want to do is move towards the light. But I like macabre humor. Like, I don't know, I just love like that sort of humor where you're not quite sure what's funny and why it's funny, and it could be like a survival tactic. It's just to really like laugh it out. So yeah, I resonate with what everyone has said. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in all of the readings tonight, there were these glittering moments of tenderness and beauty in all of this too, which is just makes it all go further and makes it all such a really, it makes it art. So yeah, it's great. I don't see any other questions yet coming in from the chat. So I'll ask another one that we always ask of all of our writers who come in and speak with us. What have you read recently that you'd like to share with us, that you'd like us to read, that you think that we should? It doesn't have to be, I mean, some of us are reading has really dropped off over the pandemic, but what's something that has stayed with you that you think that some of our readers might be interested in reading?
We might have to pick on someone.
Dorianne, I'm going to pick on you. Have you read anything recently?
Oh, well, I am obsessed with Fonda Lee's Jade City series that is like gangsters and magic, and it's like an Asian fantasy world. And I'm like literally this Sunday taking a world building class with her that I'm very excited about. And I'm just so excited about these books. I can't say enough about Fonda Lee's Green Bone series. But let's talk to our writers and find out what they like. Ryanne, what's the best book you've read recently?
Oh, it's been hard finding time to read because I'm just finishing up my master's in English. So everything I read has been stuff I've been forced to read. But Severance by Ling Ma, like it's still with me. I read it a while ago, but I still think about it. And I would like, it's the only book I've read where I wanted to read it again right after I finished it. It's just fantastic. It's a zombie novel, not in the way you expect. It's about capitalism. It's about being an immigrant. Like it's so good. So would highly recommend.
Therese, did I see you? You had something to say?
Yeah, I had to Google the name because I wanted to get the last name right. So it's called A Little Devil in America by Hanif Abdul Rakib, and it's Notes in Praise of Black Performance. It's a really good book. It's a collection of his essays on Black culture in the United States. I like the way he writes. I've never read any of his poetry, but he is a poet, and that really comes out in his writing, and it's reminiscent of when I read a collection of poems by Toni Morrison, or even like a collection of essays by Toni Morrison or essays by Gia Tolentino. I highly recommend her book of essays called Trick Mirror. So great. And I actually have this book right here that I'm working through. It's a hard read because it's like a genius. Like I think this person's a genius, but it's called The Baudelaire Fractal by Lisa Robertson. And man, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know how you wrote this. You are amazing. And it kind of feels like you're drunk, but not like, it feels like you're lucid dreaming, but very highly aware at the same time. So I highly recommend that book. Yeah.
Liz?
Awesome. So I just finished R.F. Quang's Poppy War trilogy, and oh man, it's super intense. It kept me reading the whole time. Like I couldn't put it down. It's very grimdark, so if you don't like grimdark, maybe not for you. But once again, it's an Asian inspired fantasy inspired by Chinese history. I think R.F. Quang actually has a degree in Chinese history. She definitely has a lot of education in that area anyway. And she also went to Odyssey, which is how I heard about her in the first place. And I love the trilogy, would recommend it. I know I'm a little late to the party on this one, but I'm reading Experimental Film by Gemma Files right now. And I can't sleep when I read that. It's not a good book for a work night because it's genuinely one of the most terrifying books I've ever read. So, and it's set in Ontario and includes a lot of stuff that, you know, is familiar to me, which I always love in a book. So those are mine.
I guess it's my turn. I just finished reading Return of the Trickster by Eden Robinson, the final book in her Trickster trilogy. Sort of fantasy influenced trilogy based on Hazel Halsuk culture. Great way to end that series. I really loved it. Couple quick other reads that I have looked into over the past few months. I'm currently working on the sequel to Moon of the Crested Snow, so I've been wanting to put my head into like a post-apocalyptic dystopian spec fiction kind of place. And one book that really stuck with me was Crosshairs by Catherine Hernandez. Looks at sort of a dystopian future in Toronto where people of color are targeted by this sort of fascist regime and the uprising against that. And also The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, Blackwood author, sort of a horror look at, these young hunters and their past that comes back to haunt them. So those are a few that have really stayed with me recently.
Amazing.
That's great.
We had Catherine reading from Crosshairs, an early draft before it was published. So that was quite a while ago here at Brockton, but it's exciting to hear it via other folks reading too. So that's really exciting stuff.
Well, it's exciting that it's out now, right? Because that was before it was published. Yeah. We do have a question from the audience. What do you do if you're stuck for something to write? I guess this is a writer's block question. Like, you're just stuck. What do you do? Does anybody have ideas? Yeah, Ryanne?
Yeah, so I actually have a separate Tumblr account where I just like reblog some images or quotes that seem really striking, because I feel like sometimes it's really easy to start writing when you just see something that really sticks with you. Like it just gives you a certain feeling. So I turn to that whenever I'm stuck, or I just try to listen to music because I feel like a lot of that helps as well.
Thank you, Wob.
Yeah, I go for a walk. I shut off the computer and try to go outside, get moving a little bit if I can. And if that doesn't work, I'll try to detach mentally from the writing itself and listen to some music or watch a show or play some guitar or something else. But I find any amount of time away, sort of reconfigure something up there. And then when I sit back down in front of the computer, it starts working again. So those are usually my strategies.
Thank you so much. Liz, do you have any, what do you do?
I listen to music, a lot of music. as much different music as I possibly can, and a lot of times it inspires me. I really like looking at TV shows and movies and other people's stories and going, how would I write this? How would I write this situation? How would I do this story? It would just, it's kind of hand in hand with that. I like looking for anthology themes. Like, I actually love writing to a theme anthology, and I will just custom write things for anthologies. I don't try to find anthologies for my stories. I try to find stories for anthologies. And yeah, I just find anthology calls and prompts very inspiring.
I totally feel that. I'm like, oh, I'm working on my novel, but oh, there's a cool anthology call. Maybe I'll stop working on my novel and write a short story instead. Yeah. Therese?
Yeah, what I tend to do is I just walk away. I'm like, fuck it. Like, I'm not doing this right now. And then I emotionally eat. I'm like, I'm gonna go to a donut. Like, I'm just like, I can't right now. And then I read other people's poems, and that usually kind of gives me a little bit of like, I don't know, like, I mean, when you're writing, it's very lonely. So I find like when I read other people's work, I feel like a camaraderie. So and then I kind of go back. I enter writing again through reading. So, but I think eating your emotions away is a very important process for me. So yeah, that's what I do sometimes.
100% on that train. Yes. All right. Thank you for that question. That was Jessica asking the question. So thank you, Jessica. And thanks for being here.
Jessica Westhead, who is also a wonderful writer.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And do we have any other questions coming in from the chat? I don't see any. This is your last call, folks, before I wrap it all up.
Which is great because we're almost at 8. Look at us being on time.
We're being on time, being respectful of others' time. And thank you again so much for all your readings. It's just been a pleasure tonight.
Yeah.
So we have our next Brockton happening, which you're all welcome to attend. It's on the 14th of July. If you can believe that July is the next time we're meeting. I can't believe that we're even remotely close to July, but yes. So the 14th of July, 2021.
Still remote.
Close. Just 2 months away. So we'll have Camilla Reena joining us, Kiran Bhatt, Prakash Krishnan, and Carrie Ann Lung. And our guest speaker that night will be Sonia Violent, who will be sharing information about creating audiobooks. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you to our Brockton writers. Thank you to our readers. And thank you to our listeners and our supporters. We love you.
Thank you.